Hello and welcome back. So you should have your Eclipse IDE installed, you should have Java installed, and you should have already compiled, actually written and compiled your first class, your Hello World, or as in my example that I gave you in the last tutorial, it was my class. And so today we're going to actually start building on object-oriented concepts. We're going to start out where we left off with the concept of the object, and for the object, we're going to talk about constructors, methods, and variables in terms of main components of the object. So last time when we, just a little bit of a review of the object concept, objects in Java are implemented in the form of a class, and in this particular example we have public class, which means it's open, there's no restrictions on it, it's visible by all, and I'll get into public, private, and protected in another complete lecture on its own. We called the class myClass, which means we actually have to call the file myClass. So it's myClass.java. The file name is the same as the class that's defined in the file. And we have a main method, and the main method that we're using prints out to the screen hello from Barb. So this is like your Hello World program. It's very basic. So let's extend on this concept today. And so what we're going to do is, let me zoom this in a little bit more so you can kind of see a little bit clearer. I'm just going to close this out because we don't need it anymore. In fact, you can go ahead and close yours out. In fact, let's play with Eclipse a little bit. Let's just create a new project. So what I'm going to do with this sucker is I'm going to right mouse click on it, and do I need it anymore? I could delete it, or I could just remove it. Oh, let's just delete it. If I delete it, I can actually leave it in the workspace but just take it out of my Eclipse. So if you click that little button that says delete project contents on the disk, you're going to totally delete the whole thing. And that can't be underdone, as the warning tells you, but I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm just going to press OK, and what this is going to do is just remove it from the workspace, so I don't see any of this stuff over here in the package explorer, but it's going to leave it on the hard disk. So I'm going to say OK, and it looks like it has been removed, which is good. And then I'm going to go File, New, and how about a regular old Java project? So I'm going to select Java project. And I'm going to give this one, I'm going to call this one employee, because we're going to be building an employee class in this lesson. So it's called employees, and let's just use the default location, and also let's use all the default settings for the GRE and stuff like that. We don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I'm going to click finish. When I click finish, now I have another project, and it's called employee. And we don't really need to worry about all of the other components. I'll eventually get to those pieces. But for right now, we just want to go into the source. And in the source folder, there's nothing. Not surprising. So we actually have to create something. And let's create our class. And our class is going to be called employee. So I'm going to go File, New, and I'm going to select the class option. Let me get my screen back to where I can see it right. So let me just start this over again. So I'm going to hit File, New, and then from the drop-down menu that shows up, I'm selecting Class. And so I'm going to call this class, kind of sounds a little bit redundant, but it's going to be in the package employee. So I'm going to type in employee. If I just use employee for everything, I think it just makes it easier. Let's just call it employee for the package name. No, let's see, .edu or something. Let's see. The name of the class, because it's now telling me, if you look at the top up here, it says type name. Type name is empty. So I'm going to go here, name. Let's see, I'm going to call it employee. What's it telling me about my package name? That it's discouraged. Well, yeah, by convention, packages names usually start with a lowercase, so I can go back and I can change it. I'll call it employee. The dot notation is kind of optional as well. I can just simply go like that if I wanted to. Use an employee class. By default, people like to put dots in between everything, but you don't really have to. And here we have modifiers. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. In fact, I'm probably not going to use the template that comes up on this one. So we're going to later talk about inheritance and some of these other methods down here, because we haven't talked about methods yet. That's the focus of today. So I'm just going to hit on finish, because I just want basic, add a file to my project and call it employee. So that's what I have, actually. So I have a package employee and a public class employee. That's about as bare bone as you can get. You can't really get any further than that. And inside here, if we open it up, we see that we have our first class definition for employee. If we wanted to, we can test this out and run it. We can say, well, we can let's just run. How's that? So I'm going to run it as a Java application. So it runs in a local Java application window. Let's see, selector does not contain a main type. Well, you know what? I can't run it yet. The class is too empty. So let's leave that alone for a few minutes. So I guess it's going to need a little bit more. There's nothing really for it to do. So it's looking for main. All right, so behind the scenes, I kind of put together a little template so to save myself a little typing problems and stuff. So you don't have to watch me type. Instead, I'm going to cut and paste this information and stick it in the window. And then you can pause the video and take a look at the text and type it in yourself. So let's see, I'm going to get rid of this here, public class employee. So I'm removing everything out of the window, and I'm going to put in this text here. And actually, you can probably type it in while I'm going over it. And that might not be a bad idea. That way you can kind of get an example of what we're doing. So here is our new and improved employee class, and what we're going to look at now is the structure. So you might have noticed I kind of took out all the public-private stuff. So this is the bare bones, because I'm trying to teach you how to do classes, methods, constructors, and work with variables. So I'm trying to basically dumb this down a little bit. It still works, however. In fact, we don't even need public-private or anything on anything. And those are just designations for when we're working with inheritance and some of the later concepts that we'll be looking at. So let's get started. So we have a class. It's called employee. Hopefully we've gotten that so far so good. In our class, we have this thing called a default constructor. And let me talk about constructors for a few minutes. In Java, it's really easy. We only have one. It's called a constructor. A constructor is a method that has the same name as the class name. And that's how Java knows it is the constructor. So for example, here we have employee. And it has the same name as our class employee, which kind of brings us to the concept of, well, what's a method? If you're familiar with traditional style programming, a method is nothing more than a function. And functions are functions, and what we've got in a class structure is a bunch of functions that are nested inside of a class along with some variables. And if you've experienced other programming languages before, you might have a feel for what a variable is. And we have two class variables in this particular example because we are talking about employees. We have one variable that's a name, and then we have another variable that's a salary. And what we're going to do here is use name and salary to keep track of information that's related to our employee. So how are we going to do that? Well, inside of the methods, we're going to assign values to name and salary. And I'm going to do an entire lecture on variable types, and I'll label it that way. It'll be labeled variables and how to use them. But for right now, we have two variables that are being used here. One is a string, and the other one is a double. Double represents money, gives us decimal precision. String is for, obviously, text, string information. So the name is going to be of type string. The salary is going to be of type double. It mentioned the type before the variable names. The variable name here for string name is name, and then for double, it's the name of the variable that I've decided to use is called salary. So inside, and let's just take a look at our constructor right now, and it's called a default constructor because it doesn't take on any parameters. So just like functions outside of object-oriented programming, the function can take on parameters. Well, what are parameters? That's going to be discussed actually in our next lecture when I look at different types of constructors. But for the basic concept, a parameter would be, if I go down to main here, I can see we've got some parameters here. in the main method, and the parameters are a string and a number of arguments. And the string is going to be something that would be typed in on a command line. It takes it in. So when you call a function and you give it information when you call it, parameters are essentially a way of getting information into the function or the method, and then you can assign values inside. But because we have no parameters, we're not passing anything to this method, we're just calling it. And when I say method, I'm really talking about functions, and if I say function, I'm really talking about methods. So I really should call them methods, though, because we're in the object-oriented world. Outside of object orientation, they're functions, but we're really looking at methods right now. So the default constructor, going back to the concept, is a constructor that has, or is a method that has the same name as the class name, but it doesn't take on any parameters, and it's called automatically when a new instance of the class is created. So now we're going to talk about instances as well. So what we're creating now is an object called employee, and we're going to make instances of these objects in our main driver program, and the instances are going to run the methods. So everything actually in the class, all of the functionality gets run from methods that are called from the instances of the object, and we'll see that come together in a few minutes. So what I've got now so far is just a name and a salary, and I've assigned some values. So every instance of this class that gets created, every employee that gets created is going to have a name of Joe Smith, and I just picked that at random, and a salary, I guess that's not too high, of $15.75. Not quite sure if that's reasonable or not, but we have a name and a salary that's automatically going to be assigned to every instance for every object that's created of this particular type, and the type of this particular object is called employee. And I'm using the terminology on purpose to reiterate the points of what it is we're actually doing. If you don't understand the terminology at this point, don't worry about it. Just see if you can follow along with the code. So other types of methods that appear inside of the class, I've put a couple of them here. Usually they fall into one of two categories. Either they're going to be called accessors. This is that word right here that's misspelled, actually, or maybe it's not. Eclipse doesn't recognize it as a word. But anyway, accessors, or we have what's called modifiers. And as you might guess, an accessor is going to access something in the class. This particular method is going to get the employee name. So the method is string get name. Like other classes, like other functions that are used in programming languages, we usually specify the type before the name of the function, and then the type that we specify actually gives us our return type. So in here when we say string space get name, string is the type of the method or function, get name is the name of the method or function, and it's returning name, which is a string. So if you have your mouse like I've been doing here for a few minutes, you kind of see how it fits together, where we have string and it's going to tell us more about the type. It represents character strings in terms of this little dialog box that shows up. Get name, well, it's going to tell us it's string employee.getName, which means it's inside of the employee class. Don't worry about that for right now. But then if I hover over the name, it says, it's basically giving me the full resolution. And the full resolution is telling me that name is actually a variable inside of this class. Okay, so let's move right along. We have another one exactly like it, actually. But this one gets salary instead of name. And if you remember up here at the top, we made salary variable type a double because we want to store numbers. In fact, decimal numbers, unless everyone makes whole dollar amounts for their salary, which they don't normally. If they did, we could use integers. We can also use floats, and there's a whole mess of other variable types that we can use, and I'll go over that in another lecture. But here we've got string, because we're going to want to return a string, and we're calling it getSalary, so that's the name of the method. And here we're going to return salary.toString. And this is our first kind of look at type conversions. ToString is a method called on string that will essentially convert salary, which is a double, to a string format. We want that because we don't want to print out a number. It's going to be a bunch of ASCII characters on the screen. It's not going to make any sense to us. We want to essentially return a string value because we want to print the string value to the screen. So I have down here as well a modifier. Actually, I don't have the modifier filled in yet. We'll do the modifier in the next lecture. So right now we'll just look at the accessors. It looks like I forgot to fill in the modifier. I'll do that next. But in any case, we can kind of demo this particular class and see how it works with just the accessors. In the next lecture, we'll fill in the modifier, and we'll actually add a lot more functionality to this class as well. So continuing down, you might notice, and this is probably good to point out, that so far we've been working inside of the class employee. So we have an opening bracket, and at the top we have our two variables that we've declared. And then inside, we've got an opening and closing bracket here. Here's the opening and here's the closing bracket for our default constructor employee. And I think in the next lecture, I'm going to create some more constructors and show you how you can expand upon that concept. And then underneath that, we've got two more methods. We've got string.getName and string.getSalary. And you notice there's opening and closing brackets here as well. This is all nested inside of the class. Also, what I've done, and this is kind of, it's okay to start out with this way, but it's not advisable in the future. But I've actually nested the main driver program inside of the same class as well. So what I've got now is I've got main, and main is going to be our method that's going to essentially be our driver. And when I say driver, what I mean is it's making instances of the class, and it's running those instances. So the first thing we really need to do inside of main is to make our instance. And so here's the syntax for it right here. I've got employee, which is the type. And you can kind of think of this almost like a variable initialization again, because we're talking about variables today. We're creating a new variable. It's going to be called myEmployee. Well, that particular variable is actually of an object type. And it's of an object type called employee. Because if you remember back up here, this class, I told you these classes are turns into objects, so they make objects. We're creating our own variable type, and it's an object variable type. And so we're actually going to make an instance of this class inside of the class, which is kind of like what I told you. It's a little unconventional. However, you see it all the time, because especially for a small program like this, you know, do you want to put it into another file? Next time we'll put it into another file. We'll call it main.java. Because out here we have employee.java, we call it main.java. Why do we want to break this main out anyway? And you might be thinking, I don't know, maybe not, but you might be thinking, it's because what if you want to use employee in another program, and you don't want to use this main? You have the main stuck there. You have to go back and constantly edit it. Because the concept of object orientation is to make use of this concept of reuse. So once we make an employee class, we can make instances of this employee class in every new program we want. In fact, we can make instances of employees, and I think the next class I'm going to make is going to be called boss or supervisor. So we can have employees and supervisors, and I don't know, we can have independent contractors. We can have all sorts of different people that are created and create instances of this in one main driver program, and then not have to worry about like duplicated main methods everywhere. It makes it a little bit more organized, and I'll go through that a little bit more in a lot more detail in another lecture coming up. But let's try to take this a little slower. And so going back to main, I'm making an instance of this object, and this object is called employee. So the syntax for it is the name of the type of the variable that I'm creating, which is employee. And I'm going to call it myEmployee. And let me tell you something else that's quite common that confuses everybody. Some people actually would call this employee with a lower case e. I usually say myEmployee because it looks significantly different, and I can tell, what's my variable name? Well, it's myEmployee. You don't have to call it myEmployee. You can call it anything you want. If you call it employee with a lower e, it's kind of confusing, but a lot of people like to do that for some reason. Anyway, going back to the variable here. So we're creating myEmployee, and what's that going to be? That's going to be equal to a new employee. New employee is what is creating that instance of the object, and we're taking this instance of the object and we're assigning it to the value of myEmployee. This would be back up here if I decided to say string name, and then instead of that, let's say I said string name is equal to Barb. If I did that, then string name would be initialized and the text Barb would be assigned to name. So this is what would be referred to as a declaration and an initialization. This here, just the string name, is the declaration. So we're declaring the variable name of type string, and when we assign something to it, we're initializing it. So we could actually do this in two steps. We could have said employee, just the same way as I did that variable. We could say employee in myEmployee, and then down here, put a semicolon here if we wanted to, and then say myEmployee equals new employee. But you got two lines instead of one line. So most often you're gonna see it. Both of them are correct, however, and in the beginning some students like to do that, but it actually develops some bad habits. This is a little easier, and because it's more condensed, and I don't know. I mean, it's just the same way as this is a little easier to return salary.toString, because you could take and create another variable and say, well, that variable is equal to salary.toString, and then return that variable. But then you've added an extra line of code. So I'm sort of a minimalist, and I like to basically put in as few lines as needed to accomplish the task. It makes things easier to read. Also, you may have noticed that I'm starting to use some comments. My comments are for teaching, actually. Your comments hopefully will be to self-document the code. So, like in here, instead of putting employee class constructors, methods, and variables, you can say, this class defines the structure of, this is why you don't want me to type while I'm talking. Anyway, this defines an employee or something. I mean, you can make it a little bit more descriptive, and some people like to put the comments after and say string name, well, the name of the employee, the name of the employee, the salary of the employee. This is kind of simple, and I know I'm making a huge point out of this, but you'd be amazed how much source code I look at that doesn't have any commenting in it, and you wonder, what's the XYZ ABC123 variable? I have no idea what that means. So the more you can kind of use self-identifying words for the variables, like name, salary. I could have easily said string A and double B or double D or something, and then I'd be like, what does D mean? It's a double, okay, but is that salary? And so that might cause some confusion. Another convention, and I think this comes from like an old Pascal programming preference or something, but to always start with a lowercase and then separate words with a capital letter. So myEmployee. I mean, I could type it like that, but it's a little bit more confusing. So this kind of is easier for the eyes to read if you basically make each new word with a capital. And you cannot put spaces in between variable names. That's not allowed. You can't start a variable name out with a number or a special character. It has to start out with a character, a text character. So I'll get into that when I talk about the variables, but that's just a few pointers as well. So moving right along, we've created our instance of the object, and so now we have an instance of the object, and it's called myEmployee. And you might notice I'm using myEmployee further down the road here. I no longer have to use this syntax. I'm not calling any more about this class. I've already made an instance. So now I run things from the instance. And so I have got another variable here that I've created, and it's going to be called string retrievedName. And I also have another variable down here called string retrievedSalary. And I've done an initialization and an assignment all in one. I could have very easily moved these out, put them at the top, and go string receive name, semicolon, string receive salary, semicolon, and then say retrieve name is equal to. In fact, here, we'll just do it. I'll just do one so I can show you. So at the top of the code, and these are for brand new programmers. Experienced people are probably bored right now, but long story, I have to show you as simple as possible, just make sure everybody's on the same page. So what I'm talking about here is like initializing the variables up front. Actually, I think it's just easier for me to type them. Retrieve, oh, this is where my spelling is going to go wrong. Salary. There we go. And then down here, because I've done that, now down here I can say retrieved name is going to be equal to that. And then here, this is, I can't keep this, otherwise it's going to give, oh, you know what, I can keep that though. I don't have to declare the variables anymore. I've already declared them right here. So down here, did I spell that wrong? I retrieved, oh, there's a D on the end. Retrieved, that's what I needed. And this is wrong too. Oops. There we go. Retrieve salary. Okay, there we go. I got a typo. So now you're actually experiencing what it looks like to actually correct and debug your code as well. All right, so I've declared my variables right here. I am initializing them down here, and when I'm initializing them, those little pop-ups are bothering me right now, so I'm going to try not to move my mouse too much. When I've initialized them, what I've got now is myEmployee.getName. So myEmployee is the object that I created, and I created it right here, right up here in this line. And here you might notice I have a little dot, and it says getName. This is how I call each one of the methods that's stored inside of employee. So the .getName, you might notice down here it says .getSalary. That's running these methods, getName and getName and getSalary. And what is getName going to do? Well, it's going to return name. And what's getSalary going to do? It's going to return the salary. And so what I've got now is a call where I'm going to assign the value of myEmployee.getName. It's going to return a string that's going to have the name value associated with it, and it's going to assign it to retrievedName. And then down here I'm going to print it out. And when I'm printing it out to the screen, it's a System.out.println, which is essentially from System, we're running a method out and we're running print line. We could actually just do print line ln is going to actually put a line return at the end of the line. Without that, if we just put here print, what we'd end up with then is the words back to back. But I want a line return at the end, which is why I'm using print line. And I'll talk about I/O a little bit more. But just at this point, just remember System.out is going to essentially, and we're going to use other syntax for getting input. Right now we're just outputting input. So out means essentially display it on the terminal screen. Print line. And it's a method, and what the method is going to take is a parameter, and the parameter that I'm sending it is retrievedName. And I'm pretty much doing the same thing for the salary, and I don't have to do anything different because the salary is returned because we've converted it to a string, where actually it's the same as the name because in the method we actually did the conversion that we needed to. I could have said double get salary. In fact, this will work. I could say, as an example, double get salary, and then obviously this is going to give me an error, and there we go. And now the error's gone away because I'm returning a double, for which now we've got double as the type. So that actually, that little pop-up worked out well. But what happens down here, then I got to go toString down here. So you'll see, and this is basically just preference, because here I can go like this and then go, well, it's going to be a double, it's going to give me an error. Actually, I would have to go about like this, and at the end of this one, go toString. There we go. To convert it. And essentially, that's actually the same thing. That's going to give me the same results. The only thing is, I got to do more typing out in main. How many times do I write this method? Just once. Because once we create the class, we just use it over and over again. We build a repository of these classes, and we can build more and more programs using these classes, just like this down here. How many times do we write this? Every time we write a program, we write a main method. And this is our driver program. So in essence, what I'm trying to tell you is you want to minimize the amount of work and effort that you want to put in here. This would be wrong, actually. I mean, not wrong, but this would be undesirable to have a toString down here. And you figure, how many times you're going to get the salary probably a lot if you've got a accessor to get the salary. So long story short, you want to put as much as you can into the class and just as minimal effort into the main, because as you reuse these classes over and over again, each new program is easier and easier to write in the long run. So now I should actually be able to run it and compile it. If I press run, what I'm going to get is down on the bottom here. Let me see. Oh, there we go. I've got Joe Smith, and I've got $15.75. That's coming out. And, let's see if you can see this. So on the bottom of my screen here, it's printed out, and it said Joe Smith, $15.75. And where did that come from? Well, that came from my main method. So none of the class stuff is doing anything that's going to print to the screen. What's being printed to the screen is what's running in my main method, which is my driver program. And what I've done in my driver program is I've created an instance of this class, and I've called it myEmployee. And myEmployee, I'm retrieving, running a getName, and I'm running a getSalary. And after each one of the calls, I'm printing it to the screen using a System.out.println. And you might notice, it's not that elaborate, but it demonstrates a lot of concepts, actually. It's demonstrating the accessor methods of getName and getSalary. And we've hard set the default constructor. So what does this do? All I had to do is make an instance of this class, myEmployee, and automatically, now the name is set to Joe Smith, and the salary was set to $15.75. I didn't have to change anything at all. So now this kind of demonstrates what the default constructor is used for. And the default constructor in Java is used to essentially automatically set information so that each new instance is automatically assigned some default values. So you can set, like, employment status, hired, not hired. You can set different information about the employee automatically without having to manually set it. So you might say that the constructor, any type of constructor, is going to automate some of the work of assembling that first and all instances of the class, because every instance that gets created of this class is going to have Joe Smith and the salary $15.75. In the next lecture, what I'm going to do is change Joe Smith and say not named or unknown, and then we'll have another constructor that creates an instance that assigns the name when the instance is created. And then I'll show you a few other tricks. And just on a side note, in fact, while I'm talking, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick up the source code for this. So for those of you who want to type it in, you can take a look at it. In fact, let me just close this window here, leave this window up. Let me see, make this a little smaller so you can zoom it in a little bit. Oh, let's see. Hopefully that's readable. Maybe make it a little bit bigger just in case. Oops. As I've typed in here. Oops. As I've typed on the screen here, this doesn't belong here. Let's see, will it all fit? Yeah, actually, here, let me make it all fit on one page too. There we go. So you can pause the video, and we don't need this either. You can pause the video and do a screen capture on this. So you can type this in, and maybe what I'll also try and do is put some support files out. In fact, that's not a bad idea. Put some links to some support files so that you guys don't have to type the source code in. Although, it's part of the fun is typing, right? But anyway. So as I was saying, actually, practically done with this video. But in the next segment, what we're going to do is look at some more of the constructor options that we have. In C or C++, we have things like copy constructors and deconstructors because we have dynamic memory and pointers and things like that. And we have to worry about copies of arrays, and we have to worry about allocating and deallocating assigned memory. We don't actually have to do any of that in Java. In fact, all we have is the constructor in Java. We don't have to worry about copy constructors, or if you're familiar with C++, we don't have to worry about copy constructors or deconstructors. All we have is the constructor. So fortunately for you, and let me scroll down a little bit for those of you who guys are typing this stuff in at home, here's the rest of the, while I'm talking, here's the rest of the code. And what we've got going on then is, simplicity. In fact, that's one of the things Java did, was kind of made things a little easier in terms of the object-oriented terms and procedures. So anyway, pause the video, get the code if you haven't gotten it already. Here's the first part of it. There's the second part of it. That should be hopefully enough of a view. And what I'm going to do is, for those of you who are not using the Eclipse or NetBeans or any of the IDEs, automated IDEs, I want to show you basically how you can do this manually. Obviously, you've got to have Java installed. If you have Java installed, when you type in Java C from a DOS prompt, it brings up the, and it'll, because I didn't give it a file name, it's going to bring up all the, this is how you use Java C. So if I typed in Java C space employee, and I actually have to type in the .java, this will compile. So this is doing what Eclipse did. So if I wanted to, instead of using Eclipse, I can, and you'll notice this is a Notepad file. You can take and put this code into Notepad, save it, and here I've just saved it on my C drive, and type in Java C space employee.java like I've just done a few minutes ago, and it will compile the program for you. And then if I just type in Java space employee, it will run. It'll run the program for you, and now you see it says Joe Smith and $15.75. Poor Joe. He probably is in need of a raise or something in this economy. So anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this first part, and the next part I'm going to build on more constructors and add the modifier to it, and maybe add a supervisor and some other things. After that, we're going to get into inheritance. Look for more videos. I am slowly but surely putting them together. So thank you for listening to this series.